Adrienne Vale dragged herself through the front door after a day that never seemed to end. It was 11:47 p.m. The dining room lights were still on. Leonard Vale, her father, a man who hadn't truly smiled in months, was sitting at the long dinner table with Nolan Pierce, the private cook she had hired exactly 9 days ago. They were laughing, easy and warm, like two people who had known each other for years. Adrienne stood in the doorway, briefcase still in her hand, unable to take a single step forward. Then Nolan looked up. He said nothing, just walked quietly to the kitchen and came back with a bowl of steaming soup. He set it in front of her and said gently, "You look like you haven't eaten since this morning. You deserve to be taken care of too." She felt confused and just a little irritated. What she didn't know was that this man was about to change her life forever. If this story already has your attention, follow along. You won't want to miss where this goes. Adrienne Vale had built her reputation on control. At 38, she ran Vale Meridian with the kind of precision most executives spent their entire careers chasing. Her calendar was color-coded down to 15-minute blocks. Her decisions were clean, fast, and rarely second-guessed. In 12 years of leading the company her parents had founded together, she had survived 2 recessions, 1 hostile takeover attempt, and a board restructuring that would have broken someone with less nerve. She had not broken. She had not bent. After her mother passed away 8 months ago, she did what she always did. She kept moving. She put her grief into a drawer, locked it, and buried herself deeper in work. She hired a full-time nurse, a private physician, a driver, and a round-the-clock caretaker for her father. She paid for everything that money could buy. She told herself that was enough, that it had to be enough. What she did not do was come home for dinner. Leonard Vale, 71 years old and recently retired, lived alone in the family estate on the western edge of Seattle, a house with 8 rooms, a wraparound garden, and a dining table long enough to seat 12. Every evening, he sat at one end of that table and ate across from an empty chair. The chair had been his wife's. No one had moved it. He had a chef, a nurse, a physician on call, and a driver who took him to his weekly cardiology appointment without fail. He had everything a man in his position could reasonably need. The house was maintained. The medications were organized. The grocery deliveries arrived on schedule. From the outside, it looked like a life well managed. From the inside, it looked like a waiting room. What Leonard did not have was someone to sit with him, someone to argue about the news with or ask about the garden, or notice when he pushed food around his plate instead of eating it. Someone who was there because they wanted to be, not because they were being paid to be. After 43 years of marriage, the difference between those two things had never felt more vast. Nolan Pierce had once been the kind of cook that restaurant owners fought over. At 41, he had spent nearly a decade working high-end kitchens in Seattle and Portland, the kind of places where a reservation required 3 weeks' notice and a tasting menu ran 14 courses. He was good. He knew he was good. And he had walked away from all of it without hesitation the year his daughter turned 7, and he realized she was eating school cafeteria food 5 nights a week because he was never home in time to cook for her. His wife had left when Brielle was 4. No dramatic falling out, just 2 people who had grown into entirely different lives and had the honesty to admit it. Nolan didn't carry bitterness about it. What he carried instead was a very clear set of priorities. Brielle first always, and everything else arranged around her. He built a quieter practice after that. Private cooking for elderly clients, homebound patients, people who lived alone and needed more than a delivered meal. He charged fair rates. He showed up on time. He stayed as long as the person needed. And twice a week, on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, he volunteered at a community kitchen on the east side of Seattle. A modest operation that served free meals to elderly residents, children after school, and families going through hard times. He had been doing it for 4 years. The address was listed in his application materials under Community Involvement, the same application that Adrienne Vale had approved in under 3 minutes before filing it away without reading past the first page. He needed the income. A 12-year-old had opinions about sneakers. He was not going to apologize for needing steady work. But he was also not going to do the work dishonestly. His philosophy about cooking was simple: and he had never needed to explain it to anyone who had ever gone hungry. A meal made with care did something that no vitamin supplement or meal delivery service did replicate. It told the person eating it that someone had thought about them, had stood at a stove with them in mind, had chosen the right amount of salt and the right temperature and the right moment to take the lid off, all because that specific person mattered enough to get it right. In Nolan's experience, that message, quiet, edible, completely wordless, was often the one people needed most and received least. His first evening at the Vale estate, Nolan arrived at 5 o'clock and found Leonard Vale sitting alone in the kitchen, dressed in a button-up shirt despite having nowhere to go, reading a 2-day-old newspaper. The refrigerator contained exactly what the house manager had described: fresh produce, premium proteins, and a printed meal plan from Adrian with specific portions, preparation methods, and a note at the bottom that read, "Please follow this exactly. My father has dietary restrictions. A. Vale." Nolan read the plan twice. It was technically sound. Low sodium, heart-healthy, well-balanced. It was also the kind of menu that belonged in a hospital, not a home. Everything was precise and nothing was warm. He set the plan aside and introduced himself. Leonard looked up from his newspaper with the wariness of a man who had met too many competent strangers this year. "You're the new cook," he said. "I am," Nolan said. "What did you have for lunch?" Leonard blinked. "Excuse me, lunch? What did you eat?" A pause. "I didn't." Nolan nodded slowly, the way a man does when something confirms what he already suspected. He didn't lecture. He didn't make a note on a clipboard. He just pulled up a chair across from Leonard and said, "Tell me what you used to like eating, before all the printed menus." Leonard looked at him for a long moment. Then, carefully, like a man testing ground he wasn't sure would hold, he said, "My wife used to make chicken stew. Nothing fancy. Carrots, potatoes, a little thyme. She'd let it go all afternoon." "Did she put cream in it?" "Just a spoonful, at the end." Nolan stood up and went to the stove. He didn't make the stew that night, he didn't have everything he needed, but he made the closest version he could with what was in the kitchen: a simple chicken broth with soft vegetables, a heel of sourdough warmed in the oven, and a small side of roasted beets, because Leonard had mentioned offhandedly that he missed them. Low sodium throughout, heart healthy, not a single item from Adrian's printed list. Leonard ate every bite. He didn't say much, but near the end of the meal, something in his expression shifted, the particular way a person looks when they've been reminded that the world is not entirely made of obligation and loss. He smiled. Just once, briefly. But it was real. Adrian found out the next morning when she reviewed the kitchen log. She called Nolan's cell at 7:14 a.m. He picked up on the second ring. "You didn't follow the menu," she said without preamble. "No," he said, "I didn't. I wrote that plan with my father's cardiologist. It's not a suggestion." "The nutritional targets were met," Nolan said calmly. "I checked every item against his restrictions before I cooked. Your father hasn't finished a full meal in 3 weeks, according to the notes the previous chef left behind. Last night he ate everything on his plate." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "That's not the point." "With respect, Ms. Vale, I think it might be exactly the point." She told him she would be reviewing the situation and ended the call. That evening she came home early for her meaning 8:15, and found her father in better spirits than she had seen in months. He was sitting in the living room with the television on, a cup of tea on the side table, and color in his face that hadn't been there last week. She found Nolan in the kitchen cleaning up with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned a long time ago not to leave a mess for others. "I'm considering letting you go," she said from the doorway. Nolan turned off the tap and dried his hands. He faced her without any visible anxiety. "That's your call to make," he said. "You disregarded my instructions." "I cooked your father a meal he could actually eat. I can give you the full nutritional breakdown if you'd like. Every number is within range." "It's not about the numbers." "No," he agreed. "It usually isn't." Adrian stared at him. There was something deeply irritating about a man who didn't flinch. "Then what is it about, in your opinion?" Nolan leaned against the counter and considered the question as though it deserved a real answer. "Your father doesn't need a more perfectly calibrated meal plan," he said. He needs someone to sit across from him while he eats it. Those are two different problems. You've solved one of them very well. The other one is still sitting at that table every night by itself. Before Adrian could respond, Leonard appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked between his daughter and Nolan with the quiet reading of a man who had spent decades in rooms where negotiations happened. "Adrian," he said gently, "I don't need more people looking after me. I have enough of those. What I need is a meal where someone actually sits down with me." He paused. "Last night was the first time in months I didn't feel like a patient." Adrian opened her mouth, closed it. She was not a woman who was easily moved. She had trained herself not to be. But there was something about her father saying those words in that kitchen, standing in the house where she had grown up, in the room where her mother had cooked for 30 years, that landed somewhere below the defenses she had spent a decade building. She could fire Nolan. She had every right to. He had technically operated outside her instructions, and Adrian Vale did not make a habit of tolerating that. But her father had finished his dinner and smiled, and the empty chair at the long table had not been mentioned once tonight. She looked at Nolan. He was watching her without pressure, not pleading, not performing, not trying to manage her reaction. Just waiting. "Don't think that because you made one good meal you understand my family," she said finally. Nolan nodded once. "I don't need to understand everything. I just need to make sure he doesn't eat alone." Adrian said nothing else. She set her briefcase on the counter, picked up the printed menu she had left on the refrigerator, and walked out of the kitchen. She didn't throw it away, but she didn't hand it back to him either. Nolan stayed. Adrian did not change her habits. She was still out of the house by 7 every morning and rarely back before 9 at night. She still reviewed the kitchen logs, still checked the weekly grocery receipts, still left updated notes on the refrigerator when she thought something needed adjusting. She did not eat breakfast at home. She did not come back early enough for dinner. She kept her world organized around the premise that if she managed enough variables precisely enough, everything would hold together. What she couldn't manage was the fact that the house felt different. She noticed it in small ways. The hallway smelled faintly of rosemary in the evenings. Her father's light was on later than usual. Not the blue flicker of a television, but the warmer glow of a lamp, the kind that meant someone was actually in the room talking. When she passed Leonard's study one Thursday night, she heard him laughing. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't care who's listening. She kept walking. She told herself none of it was remarkable. Nolan did not try to win her over. He cooked. He cleaned up. He kept detailed notes on Leonard's appetite, energy, and mood, which he left on the kitchen counter each evening in a small spiral notebook he'd bought himself. He didn't send reports to Adrian directly. If she wanted to read them, they were there. If she didn't, he wouldn't push. When Adrian left new instructions on the refrigerator, he read them carefully. When the instructions were medically sound, he followed them. When they weren't, when they were the kind of clinical overcorrection that came from someone managing anxiety through spreadsheets, he made quiet adjustments and documented his reasoning in the notebook clearly and without apology. One evening, Adrian came home to find a note from him that read, "Substituted brown rice for the prescribed white. Same caloric value, lower glycemic index, better for sustained energy." Dr. Reeves mentioned at last Tuesday's appointment that sustained energy levels were a priority. Full breakdown on page 4. She flipped to page 4. He was right on every count. She put the notebook back on the counter without comment. When she left a new note reducing Leonard's evening portion by 30% because she had read something online about caloric restriction and longevity, Nolan left a response beneath it. "Respectfully, Leonard is 71, not overweight, and currently underweight for his frame. Reducing his portions may worsen his fatigue. I'd suggest flagging this for Dr. Reeves before making changes. I'm happy to call the office tomorrow morning." Adrian stared at the note for a long moment. Then she crossed out her original instruction and wrote, "Fine. Flag it with Reeves." She did not say thank you, but she stopped leaving instructions about portions. Brielle Pierce was 12 years old, sharp as a tack, and had her father's ability to read a room in under 30 seconds. She started coming to the Vale estate 2 or 3 afternoons a week after school, sitting quietly at the kitchen table while Nolan prepped dinner, doing homework and eating whatever her father put in front of her without complaint. She was small for her age, with close-cropped natural hair and a habit of watching adults carefully before deciding whether they were worth talking to. She had decided almost immediately that Leonard was worth talking to. Within 2 weeks, she was reading to him after dinner library books she'd picked herself. Mysteries, mostly the kind where the solution was hidden in plain sight from the beginning. Leonard listened with his eyes half closed and his hands folded in his lap, and occasionally he would say something like, "Check what the gardener said in chapter 2. I think you'll find it matters more than you think." And Brielle would flip back and he would be right. And her expression would shift into the particular delight of someone who has just realized they are in the company of a genuinely clever person. She had also decided, with the frank judgment of a 12-year-old, that Adrian was a problem. Not a bad person necessarily, but a problem. Someone who paid for everything and showed up for nothing. Brielle said none of this out loud. She watched and she waited, and she made up her own mind. Leonard was eating well by the end of the 3rd week. Dr. Reeves noted at his next appointment that his blood pressure had improved and his energy levels were stabilizing. Adrian received the update by email. She read it twice. She told herself it was the medication, but she started coming home at 8 instead of 9. It wasn't a decision exactly. It was more like a gravitational pull she didn't examine too closely. She would finish her last call in the car, sit in the driveway for a moment, and find that she didn't want to go inside to an empty kitchen. She wanted, and this was not a feeling she had a category for, she wanted to hear something, a voice, the sound of something cooking. She never admitted this to anyone, including herself. The night everything shifted. Adrian came home at 10:30 and nearly went down in the kitchen. She had been running on coffee since 6 that morning. 4 back-to-back meetings, a board call that had run 90 minutes over, and a last-minute filing that needed her signature 3 times. She had not eaten. She had told herself she would eat when she got home, and then kept saying that as the hours slid past. She was reaching for the refrigerator handle when her vision blurred at the edges. She caught herself on the counter with both hands. Nolan was still in the kitchen. He saw it happen and didn't make a scene. He just pulled out the chair at the kitchen island and said calmly and without drama, "Sit down." She sat. She wasn't sure why. He moved around the kitchen the way he always moved, without wasted motion, without noise, and 4 minutes later he set a bowl in front of her. Chicken congee, soft and steaming with a little scallion on top and a curl of ginger she could smell before she even picked up the spoon. "You can be a CEO again tomorrow," he said. "Tonight you have to be a person first." She wanted to say something sharp. She was very good at sharp. But she was too tired and the bowl in front of her was too warm, and the smell of it did something she hadn't expected. It took her somewhere else entirely. Back 10 years, maybe more. Her mother's kitchen. Sunday mornings. The particular safety of a house that smelled like something was being made for you. She ate without speaking. She was most of the way through the bowl when Leonard appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was in his robe, unhurried, as though he'd simply wandered in for a glass of water. But he looked at his daughter sitting at the counter, still in her work clothes, eating with the focused relief of someone who had been hungry for hours, and his expression was not surprise. It was grief and love, and something that might have been guilt. He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her. "Adrian," he said quietly, "you're exhausted. You have been for a long time." He paused. "I'm not asking you to stop working. I'm asking you to rest, to eat, to let someone take care of you the way you've been taking care of everyone else." Another pause, softer this time. "And if someone good comes along, someone who genuinely wants to do that, don't push him away before you've given him a fair chance." Adrian looked up then. Her father was watching her with the steady patience of a man who had been waiting to say this for a long time. She didn't answer him, but she didn't look away either. Nolan was at the sink, his back to both of them, giving them the privacy of pretending he hadn't heard. But his hands had gone still. Something changed after that night. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the quiet way that real things change. Nolan began leaving a covered plate in Adrian's refrigerator on evenings he knew she'd be home late. He never mentioned it, She never thanked him. But the plate was always empty the next morning. Adrian started arriving home before the kitchen light went off. She would sit at the counter with a glass of water while Nolan finished cleaning up, and they would talk carefully at first about logistics and Leonard's appointments, then gradually about other things. About Brielle's school project on civil rights architecture. About the fact that Leonard had apparently beaten Brielle at chess twice, and she was not taking it well. Brielle, for her part, began to revise her opinion of Adrian with the reluctant fairness of someone who hates being wrong. Adrian remembered details that Brielle didn't eat cilantro, that she was working on a history paper about Reconstruction, that she had a math test on the 15th. She never made a show of remembering, she just remembered. It was not a romance. Not yet. It was something quieter and more uncertain. Two people discovering that they did not make each other smaller. Marissa Lane had been Adrian's chief operating officer for 6 years. She was meticulous, fast, and completely committed to the company in the way that people become committed to things when those things have saved them from something worse. She had joined Vail Meridian during its most precarious period, a restructuring year when half the leadership team had quit and the board was ready to vote Adrian out. Marissa had stayed. She had helped hold the company together through sheer force of operational discipline, and she had never forgotten what it looked like when Adrian let her guard down at the wrong moment. She told herself she was protecting the company. She was not entirely wrong. She was also not entirely right. What Marissa understood about Adrian was that emotion unchecked had nearly broken Vail Meridian once. What she did not understand was that the absence of it was quietly breaking Adrian in a different way. Slower. Less visible, but no less real. She had watched Adrian's edges soften over the past month with the focused attention of someone monitoring a warning sign. She did not see warmth coming back to a woman who needed it. She saw vulnerability threatening someone she had spent 6 years protecting. When the East Side development proposal crossed her desk, Marissa had already run the projections 3 times. The location was ideal. The return would move Vail Meridian decisively out of its cautious post-restructuring posture and back into genuine growth. She brought it to Adrian with full conviction. What the proposal listed as a tenant-occupied commercial property was in fact the community kitchen on the east side of Seattle, where Nolan Pierce had spent every Tuesday and Thursday evening for 4 years. That address appeared in Nolan's application file under Community Involvement, a file that Adrian had approved without reading past the first page. Neither woman had connected those two facts. The proposal landed on Adrian's desk on a Thursday afternoon, tucked inside a stack of Q3 materials. Marissa walked her through the numbers in a 30-minute briefing. "This is a clean deal," Marissa said. "The board wants an answer before the end of the month." Adrian reviewed the projections. She asked 3 questions about zoning and 2 about projected return timeline. She did not ask what was currently operating on the property. She told Marissa she would give a final answer by Friday. That Friday, under the weight of a board call that ran long and a Q3 report that needed to close by end of day, Adrian signed the preliminary approval. She told herself it was preliminary. She told herself she would review the full impact assessment next week. She told herself there was still time. She did not go home that Friday evening. Nolan got the call Saturday morning just after he dropped Brielle at her weekend art class. It was the community kitchen's coordinator, her voice tight with the particular strain of someone trying not to panic. A notice had arrived, a formal letter from Vail Meridian's development office outlining an acquisition of the property block. The building would need to be vacated within 90 days. Nolan sat in the parking lot for a long time after he hung up. He thought about the 83-year-old woman who came every Tuesday and ate slowly because the kitchen was one of the few places that always had something soft. He thought about the 8 kids who did homework at the corner tables while their parents worked double shifts. He thought about 4 years of Thursday evenings and what that place had given back to him in something he didn't have a business word for. Then he thought about his application, the one with the community kitchen listed under community involvement, the one Adrian Vail had approved without reading past the first page. He drove to the Vail estate. He found Adrian in her home office, where she had been since Friday night working through the Q3 filing. He stood in the doorway and waited until she looked up. "The community kitchen on the east side got a notice," he said, "from your company." Adrian went still. "I know you have a lot of deals on your desk," he said. "I know this one probably looked like a routine acquisition, but that building feeds people, real people, every week." He paused. "My address was in my application, the one you hired me from." She opened her mouth. He shook his head very slightly. "I'm not asking you to explain. I just need you to understand what that place is before it becomes a line item." He set his key to the estate on the edge of her desk. He laid the meal notebook beside it, weeks of careful, handwritten notes, every page filled in. "I can't keep cooking in a warm house," he said quietly, "while your signature is taking dinner away from people who have nowhere else to go." Then he left. Brielle came by that afternoon to collect a book she had left in Leonard's study. She found Adrian in the hallway and stopped. "He's a good person," Brielle said. "Not angry, not dramatic, just clear, the way children are when they have thought something through completely. He doesn't take food away from people so he can feel safe. Even when things are hard for us, he doesn't do that." She picked up her book and walked out. Leonard found Adrian an hour later sitting at the long dining table, the empty chair across from her matching her own stillness. He sat beside her. "You have every right to be tired," he said, "but don't let that tiredness make you into someone who can't see other people's pain." He was quiet for a moment. "Nolan is a good man, not because he cooks well, because he doesn't walk away from people when they need someone to stay." Adrian sat alone at the table long after her father went to bed. The house was very quiet, but for the first time, the silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like a question she didn't know how to answer yet. The weekend passed in a silence that had weight to it. Adrian did not sleep well. She worked because working was the thing she knew how to do when everything else felt unstable, but the work didn't hold her the way it usually did. She kept returning to the same image, Nolan's key on the edge of her desk, placed there without drama, without anger, with the quiet finality of a man who had made his decision and was at peace with it. She had managed difficult people her entire career. She knew how to handle resistance, how to neutralize opposition, how to reframe a loss as a strategic pivot. None of those tools worked here because Nolan had not tried to pressure her. He had just told her the truth and left her alone with it. That was somehow worse. Monday morning, Marissa was waiting in Adrian's office before she arrived. The projections were printed and bound. The board timeline was outlined on a single, clean page. The attorneys had already begun preliminary title work. Marissa stood at the window with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had already run this conversation in her head and won it. "We need to confirm the acquisition by end of week," she said. "The board is watching this one closely. If you pull back now, they're going to read it as a loss of nerve." "Then they'll read it wrong," Adrian said. Marissa turned. "Adrian, I read the full impact report this weekend." Adrian set her bag down and sat at her desk. "The property assessment lists the community kitchen as a commercial tenant. It isn't. It's a non-profit on a month-to-month lease that the previous owner extended out of goodwill for 4 years. There are more than 80 regular users, a third of them elderly and food insecure. We didn't assess that. We didn't even document it correctly. That's not our liability." "I'm not talking about liability." Adrian looked up. "I'm talking about what we actually did." Marissa was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped, not softer, but more direct. "You remember what this company looked like 6 years ago. You remember what it cost to pull it back. I stayed when everyone else left because I believed in what you were building." She paused. "I've watched you over the past month, and I'm telling you as someone who has been in your corner since the beginning, I'm worried you're making a decision based on something personal." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You're not wrong that this is personal," she said, "but that doesn't make it wrong." She set the bound report aside. "The deal isn't dead. The location is still viable. I'm restructuring the proposal we build around the kitchen, not over it. We fund it as an independent community trust. We take the tax benefit and we develop the surrounding parcels. The return timeline shifts by 18 months. The board won't like 18 months. Then I'll explain it to them. She met Marissa's eyes steadily. You helped me save this company because you believed it was worth saving. Help me make sure it's still worth something when we're done. Marissa held her gaze for a long moment. Then she uncrossed her arms, picked up the bound report, and walked to the door. I'll need the restructured numbers by Thursday, she said, and she left. The board meeting was on Wednesday. Adrian had spent 2 nights building the alternative proposal from scratch, pulling in her development team, her legal counsel, and a community land trust attorney she had never worked with before. She went in without certainty about how the vote would go. She stood at the head of the table and laid it out plainly. The original acquisition was financially sound. The restructured version was financially sound and defensible to investors, to regulators, and to the public. The community kitchen would remain. The surrounding development would proceed on a modified timeline. The company would fund the kitchen trust transparently at a level that generated a meaningful tax offset. In 3 years, the East Side site would be a mixed-use development with a functioning community anchor at its center. The kind of story that attracted ESG-focused capital, which the board had been chasing for 2 years without a credible vehicle. We've been looking for a way to tell a different story about this company, she said. This is it. Not because it's charity, because it's the right kind of growth. 2 board members pushed back. One threatened to escalate to a shareholder vote. Adrian let them finish and then answered every objection with the numbers she had spent 48 hours preparing. The vote passed. Marissa, who had sat quietly at the back of the room the entire meeting, caught Adrian's eye as people filed out. She gave a single small nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a concession. It was one pragmatic woman recognizing another. That was enough. Adrian did not call Nolan. She thought about it, rehearsed it even in the car on the way home Wednesday evening. She could call him, explain the board decision, tell him the kitchen was safe. It would be efficient. It would be the kind of thing she was good at, delivering outcomes. But she opened his application file again that afternoon, the one she had approved in under 3 minutes 9 weeks ago. She had read it this time, every line. The years in restaurant kitchens, the decision to leave when his daughter was 7, the Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the community kitchen listed quietly under community involvement, without emphasis, without explanation. He hadn't put it there to impress her. He had put it there because it was true. She had known where that kitchen was before she signed the preliminary approval. She had held that information in her hand and not seen it because she had been moving too fast to look. That was not something a phone call fixed. She found a stock pot in the back of her kitchen cabinet, the good one her mother had used for Sunday soups, with the heavy bottom and the lid that fit too tightly and released a breath of steam when you lifted it. She hadn't touched it in years. She washed it, set it on the stove, and spent 2 hours making the worst approximation of chicken soup that had ever been produced in the state of Washington. She used too much water and not enough salt. She cut the carrots unevenly, some in coins, some in rough chunks, none of them the right size. The broth was thin. The chicken was slightly overcooked. She tasted it and made a face. Then she put it in the largest container she owned and drove to the east side of Seattle. It was raining. The community kitchen occupied the ground floor of a building with no signage anyone would notice from a distance, just a hand-painted wooden board above the door and warm light spilling through the windows onto the wet sidewalk. Adrian parked across the street and sat for a moment looking at it. She had driven past this neighborhood hundreds of times. She had never looked at this building. She carried the container inside. The space was small and organized with the particular ingenuity of places that do a lot with very little. Folding tables, mismatched chairs. A serving counter along the far wall where volunteers were ladling food into bowls. The room was about half full. An elderly man eating slowly with a plastic spoon. A cluster of kids at a corner table arguing over a math problem. A young woman in scrubs who had come straight from a shift and was eating with her eyes half closed. Adrian stood at the door until a volunteer noticed her and came over. She explained that she had brought soup and that she wanted to help serve if that was all right. The volunteer looked at her, looked at the container and said, "Sure, grab an apron." She served for 2 hours. Her soup was the thin, over-seasoned batch she'd made at home. She set it beside the kitchen's own pot of beef stew and let people choose. Most people chose the stew. She watched their faces with more attention than she usually paid to anything in a boardroom. She didn't perform. She didn't explain who she was. She just showed up and stayed. Nolan arrived at 7:15 the way he always did on Thursdays. He saw her from across the room before she saw him standing at the serving counter in a borrowed apron, slightly too large, ladling soup with the careful concentration of someone taking a simple task seriously. He put a hand on Brielle's shoulder before she could say anything. He watched for a few minutes, long enough to be certain. She was not there for an audience. She was not there to be seen making amends. She was there the way you go somewhere when you have decided quietly and without announcement to become a different version of yourself. When the last of the dinner service wound down and the room began to empty, Adrian started stacking cups and breaking down the serving line. She looked up and found Brielle standing a few feet away watching her. Adrian reached under the counter and picked up a container she had brought separately sealed, labeled in her own handwriting. She held it out. "Roasted chicken and mashed potatoes," she said. "No cilantro. And there's a separate container with the green beans because I wasn't sure if you wanted them mixed in." Brielle looked at the containers. Then she looked at Adrian. Something in her 12-year-old face shifted. Not all at once, but perceptibly the way a door moves on a hinge. She took the containers. "You remembered about the cilantro." "I remembered," Adrian said. Brielle nodded once with the gravity of someone issuing a conditional verdict. Then she went to find a table. Nolan was folding chairs near the back of the room when Adrian approached. He didn't stop what he was doing. She picked up a chair and folded it and set it beside his stack without being asked, and they worked in silence for a moment. When the last chair was down, he turned to face her. "Do you understand why I left?" he asked, not as an accusation, as a real question. "Yes," she said. "Because you couldn't teach me to value a meal while my signature was taking meals away from people who needed them." He nodded slowly. "And now?" She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the room, the folded chairs, the clean tables, the hand-painted sign still visible through the window from the inside. "The acquisition is restructured," she said. "The kitchen stays. It'll be funded as an independent trust. The development goes ahead on the surrounding parcels." She paused. "It should have been the plan from the beginning. I had your address in my hand before I signed. I moved too fast to see it." She said it plainly without softening it. Nolan was quiet for a moment. "That took something," he said. "The board vote wasn't the hard part," she admitted. "Coming here was." "Why?" She considered it honestly. "Because the board I know how to handle. This..." She stopped. "I don't have a lot of practice showing up somewhere without a plan." "I noticed," he said, and this time a real smile, brief, careful, but real. "I'm not asking you to come back right away," she said. "And I'm not asking for forgiveness because it would make things easier. I just want you to know that you were right. Not just about the kitchen, about the way I was living. You and my father kept telling me the same thing, and I kept filing it under things to address later." She looked at him directly. "I don't want to keep doing that." Nolan held her gaze for a long moment. "Then don't start from later," he said. "Start from now." That was all. No large promises, no dramatic gesture, just that an open door plainly offered. It was enough. 3 months later, the East Side Community Kitchen was still standing. It had a new roof, funded by the Vale Meridian Community Trust. It had 2 new industrial burners donated without public announcement, though the kitchen coordinator had a reasonable guess about who was responsible. Leonard Vale showed up on Tuesday afternoons and told stories to whoever would listen, which turned out to be quite a lot of people. Brielle had claimed a corner table near the window as her personal homework station and defended it with polite ferocity. Nolan still cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He still put Brielle first always. He still showed up to every place he said he would, and he still left every kitchen cleaner than he found it. Adrian was still a CEO, still precise, still demanding, still not particularly easy to work for. But she had started blocking her calendar on Friday evenings, not for calls or filings or anything that could go in a report, just for dinner. On the first Friday in December, she stood in the kitchen of the Vale estate and attempted to make roasted chicken for the four of them: her father, Nolan Brielle, and herself. She had followed the recipe carefully. She had checked the temperature twice. The chicken was, by any objective standard, slightly overdone on one side and underdone on the other. Leonard ate it without complaint and said it reminded him of a meal he'd once had at a very beloved restaurant.
"What restaurant?" Brielle asked.
"One that tried very hard," Leonard said with complete sincerity. Brielle, who had watched Adrian cut carrots earlier with the expression of someone witnessing a crime against vegetables, stifled a laugh. Nolan said nothing. He stood beside Adrian at the counter and quietly, without making a lesson of it, adjusted her grip on the knife. "Start with the heel of the carrot," he said. "Keep your knuckles here, you'll have more control."
She tried it.
The next slice was cleaner. She looked up at him for a moment and something passed between them, not a word, not a gesture, just the particular warmth of two people who have earned their way to a table together. Adrian looked around the kitchen. Her father at the island arguing cheerfully with Brielle about which mystery novel to read next. The smell of something roasted and imperfect and entirely hers. The sound of people talking without anyone checking a phone.
She had spent 12 years building a company.
She had spent most of them running too fast to notice what she was running toward. This, she understood now, was what it felt like to arrive somewhere. Not the absence of work or ambition, just the simple, difficult, necessary thing her father had been trying to tell her for months. The thing Nolan had shown her without ever saying it outright. Rest didn't mean stopping. Sometimes it meant finally sitting down at your own table.
If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the person who keeps going long past empty,
Who takes care of everyone and forgets to receive, this one was for you. The people who show up quietly, cook without being asked, and remind us that we're allowed to be taken care of too. They're the ones worth holding on to. Follow along for more stories like this and share this with someone who needs to hear it today.